Hello and welcome to Masterclass number 25. My name's Morag Gamble. The topic of our Masterclass today is permaculture and the global sustainability goals. Welcome to everybody. Thanks so much for being here. Some of you are watching this live, I know, and I'm really happy that you're here. Feel free to start introducing yourself in the chat section. Be great if you could include both your name and where you're from. That'd be wonderful. And welcome to if you're watching this later. I'm so glad that you could find the time to join us. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm meeting with you today, which is the Gubbi people, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. And I'd also encourage you to add in the chat too the traditional custodians of the land on which you're seated today. So welcome to the Permaculture Educator Program students as well. It's lovely that you can be joining us here today. So you're very welcome to add in comments and chat as we're going along down the side. Where possible, we'll be able to dive in there too and answer some of your questions, but also feel free to be chatting yourselves too and asking questions that are relevant to tonight's topic. I'm really delighted that in this masterclass I'm going to be joined by my daughter.
Hi, I'm Maya and I'm happy to be here. I'm homeschooled and I'm 14, and today I'm going to be giving some examples of the SDGs and also asking some questions about them. So, I've grown up in Krista Waters eco-village, and permaculture is a very large part of my life. I am a SDG multiplier trainer through Gaia Education, and I also got my PDC when I was 12 in Sabina School, which is an orphanage in Africa. At the moment, I'm working to be a certified permaculture teacher, even though I have been teaching with my mum for ages. So I'm really interested in tying together permaculture and SDGs, and I hope you enjoy this masterclass.
So this masterclass series is, as always, is presented by the Permaculture Education Institute. And I've been presenting these for a couple of years now. So this is masterclass number 25, and every month another free masterclass is offered. And the topic is always chosen from something that you've asked. Sent in a question or made a request about a topic here. So they're always sponsored by the Permaculture Education Institute, which is the organisation I run and lead the Permaculture Educators program from. It's also offered through our Permaculture Life program, which is the blog, the YouTube, all of the free materials that I put out around permaculture, and also our incredible edible garden course. The Ethos Foundation is also an organisation which is a co-sponsor of this program, which is the permaculture charity that I organise, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. And of course now it's also a session that is presented or co-presented by the permayouth. I'm wondering, did you get a chance to see last month's masterclass, which was masterclass number 24, and we were exploring what now? A permaculture kitchen garden revolution or regenerative evolution, looking at how the kitchen garden movement is really experiencing a renaissance at the moment. So you can find that masterclass now available through one of the many channels that I have available, and I'll put a link to that below. So today's topic, all about permaculture and these global goals, the Global Sustainable Development Goals, otherwise known as the SDGs. So you'll hear me talking about the SDGs a bit throughout this session. So the SDGs are essentially an agenda for 2030. It's otherwise known as the 2030 Agenda. It's a call to action for people, planet and prosperity. Now, these 17 goals were adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 2015 and ratified unanimously by 193 countries, which is a landmark achievement. And actually, in developing up these 17 core goals, they consulted something like 7 million people. It was the biggest ever consultation process of the United Nations. And really what it's doing is trying to set out a rights-based agenda until 2030 and a real clear commitment to leave no one behind. So I came across these goals many years ago. However, it was more recently in a session with May East, who is actually one of the co-authors of the SDGs. Now, May is also the CEO of Gaia Education and a UNITAR Fellow and a Global Sustainability Leader, awarded multiple years for her leadership in these roles. She was also a long-term resident of the Findorn Foundation, which is where I met her, maybe 20-odd years ago now. So May's work is based in a permaculture approach. And when I met with her recently, we talked about the SDGs and permaculture. And she said to me that essentially that the SDG she sees as a really clear global framework that has been agreed upon and accepted by governments and universities and NGOs around the world. But what she's seen in on-the-ground projects is that permaculture is a very clear pathway that enables communities and individuals and families and neighborhoods and farms to be able to implement the SDGs. It's a practical pathway to be able to implement these global goals. So the 17 goals are really aspirations, and what we're wanting to explore about is how are we going to move towards these goals and transform our world. So May talks about setting goals for a sustainable future as being a starting place for global changes. So we are in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis as we speak, and what we need to be thinking about is how we can begin to build back better. And what we need to be looking at really closely is how we can create regenerative futures and build in that resilience, the future-proofing. And permaculture offers such a cohesive and practical set of ethics and skills and design principles to enable us to take that step. So if we combine the goals of the SDGs, the global goals, with the permaculture approach, we have a very sound regenerative future-proofing approach. Now we can see too how the permaculture approach really aligns itself with so many of, well, actually all of the SDGs. And I've just selected a couple out here. So permaculture's approach really helps us to think about how we can live a one planet life to reduce our impact so that we're actually helping to draw down carbon in our regenerative soil and farming practices and the rewilding of the planet. And this, of course, relates to how we're living life on the land and supporting the diversification and the rewilding of our food systems, and also regenerating the forests and the natural systems. At the same time, also really looking at how we can diminish our impact on the oceans and allow life below the surface of the water to flourish, which cause us to become so much more aware of our consumption and production patterns and to shift that completely. And in order to do all of these things, we need to very much address how it is that we live in our daily life, in our cities and in our communities, so that they are supportive of creating a safe climate, restoring the land, restoring the water, and being within the Earth's limits in terms of our production and our consumption. What's become apparent during COVID-19 is that the world is capable of responding at the pace and the scale that is needed to address global crises. We've seen that. We're experiencing it right now. And what we need to see is that the SDGs can also be pursued with as much decisiveness, solidarity, urgency, and commitment as we've seen with COVID. What's really important here, though, is that we think about how the biosphere, the protection and the regeneration of the biosphere is the foundation for everything else. It's not how we've often seen that we have, environmental issues, social issues, and economic issues in separate bubbles. This wedding cake, what they call the wedding cake model that's come out of the Stockholm Resilience Centre, shows very clearly how we need to have the restoration, the protection, and the focus on the biosphere as being the foundation upon which sustainable societies can sit, and within that, an economic system that supports the rest. So we can't have an economic system that is destroying and undermining the cultural and the ecological basis on which it sits. So you can see here how they've layered the different sustainability goals on top of that very foundation of actually protecting the land, the oceans, the water, and creating a safe climate. And that these two also connect very clearly with the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, and fair share. So the foundation being earth care, and then layering on top of that people care, and then fair share. And so the economic system is promoting social justice. The 5 pillars of the SDGs, upon which the SDGs are based, are these 5 Ps. So focus on people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnerships. So again, caring for people, caring for planet, and creating equitable and socially just environments where we can encourage a level of prosperity that's based on planetary limits, and a peace which supports people care and planetary care, and that we can begin to find ways to work together and implement the goals that we need to see and the action that we need to take, not just locally but globally too. The other day, Maia and I were talking with Fritjof Capra about a number of things, and one of the things we discussed were the SDGs and the role that they play in helping society move towards a more regenerative way forward.
So here's a preview of one of Fritjof Capra's films. It's called To the Heart of the Matter, and it's particularly about a systems approach to the SDGs.
In the coming decades, the survival of humanity will literally depend on our ecological literacy, on our ability to understand the basic principles of ecology and to live accordingly. None of our global problems, energy shortages, environmental degradation, climate change, economic inequality, violence and war, none of these problems can be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they're all interconnected and interdependent. What we need is systemic solutions. Solutions that do not deal with any problem in isolation, but always within the context of other problems. In fact, the systems approach is a powerful tool that can make all the difference. This is the profound lesson we need to learn from nature. The way to sustain life is to build and nurture communities from local to global levels. If we have all the knowledge and the technology to build a sustainable world, why don't we do it?
So Fritjof talks about how the global problems that we're experiencing today are all systemic problems, that they're all interconnected and interdependent. And he says, therefore, that the SDGs also need to be seen as a systemic set, which is interconnected and interdependent. And what he means by this is that it's vital that we take the whole set of principles and look at how we can implement those as together in a connected way, rather than atomizing it and just picking one particular element and saying, okay, well, what can we do just about climate, or what can we do just about water? That in order to solve the problems that we're facing, which are systemic problems, the global interconnected crises, we need to be responding to this with a systemic set of solutions and goals as well. And the other thing that Fritjof asks us is, do we have the collective wisdom and political will to learn the lessons and apply these to the climate crisis? I'd also like to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Daniel Christian Weil, who is a fellow eco-villager and permaculture person. He's spent many years in Findhorn Foundation, the eco-village in Scotland. He's also spent time studying permaculture in places like the Centre for Alternative Technology in Wales, and he currently is living in Mallorca, where he's based, and he consults globally around developing regenerative cultures. He's actually the author of a magnificent book called Designing Regenerative Cultures. And one of the things that he's done over the last few years is developing the Gaia Education, which is an NGO based around producing fantastic sustainability education materials and programs and offer them globally. And Daniel was the originator of the SDG flashcards, which have been used in these programs everywhere, and they help to cultivate a real holistic exploration of the SDGs. So like Fritjof was talking about, not to look at them in isolation, but to really find ways to see together how they can inform how we need to move forward. And Fritjof and Daniel have spent many conversations exploring the idea of a regenerative culture and the SDGs. And so I really look to these thought leaders as people who can help to guide us to understand how we can bring the SDG thinking into our eco-village and our permaculture thinking. So Daniel talks about how we're now challenged to fundamentally redesign the human presence and impact on Earth. And he sees that the SDGs are clear goals that can help to guide us towards this redesign. And these are some of the cards you can see here. So if you're interested in exploring the SDGs and would like to access these cards, you can have a look on the Gaia Education website. So they not only have these series of cards, and on the flip side there's questions, so many different questions that you can use to explore together in groups or to get you thinking about how you might apply these in your own context. So it's interesting because it's looking at not just about, okay, here's the solution, here's all your sets of goals. Daniel really focuses on exploring how we need to address these SDGs through a questioning process, which I think is a really fabulous way of getting to the heart of the matter where we are. And in association with that, there's also a little handbook for people who are looking to actually work with communities to use these sorts of cards to explore the principles. So this was what the training that I was doing with May East, with my daughter and also my son, Hugh. And so both Hugh and Maya are some of the youngest SDG trainers in the world, and they're very keen on finding ways to work with other young people to explore what these SDGs mean, because it's something that gives them a very tangible set of ways of thinking about the future and ways of thinking about actually designing now that can help to connect them with what is positively happening in the world. And Bucky Fuller said, if you want to teach people a new way of thinking, don't bother trying to teach them. Instead, give them a tool, the use of which will lead to new ways of thinking. And so that's what these SDGs are really about. It's a tool to help us think differently about how we're living and where we want to go. And the SDG cards, the flashcards that Daniel designed, is actually a tool that can help us to dive even more deeply into that.
So I'd just like to give you a few examples of how the questions and the goals relate to me in what I do with the permayouth and in my life. So Firstly, I'd like to talk about quality education. So this is all about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for everyone. So permayouth is very much connected to this, with teaching people very valuable life skills, as well as showing them how they can interact with their communities and also how they can create food sovereignty in their households. It also provides quality education for the refugees that we connect with as well in Uganda and Kenya, and ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education for all. Can you think of a permayouth project focused on education in your region or in your community that you could do? Last year in April, I went to Findhorn, where there was a climate change and consciousness conference, and Gaia Education is based in Findhorn. So they've got many pictures of Findhorn on the cards. So this picture here is a picture of the whiskey barrel houses that are made out of the old whiskey barrels, and they're very nice houses. So pretty much it's this goal is sustainable cities and communities, and how can you make them inclusive, safe, resilient and sustainable for everyone. So in permayouth, I'm interested in looking at the relationships between these villages and eco-villages and how we can relate them to cities and towns and refugee camps. So do you think the relationships between people living in villages are different from people living in cities? Another card is industry, innovation and infrastructure, and this is number 9. At the conference in Findhorn, there was people from 44 countries, and even in the youth section that I was in, there was a very large variety. This was a very big hotspot for ideas and innovation in this time, and lots of connections were made. So when we were in Findhorn as well for the conference, we saw heaps of electric cars lined up, and that was part of the car share program that they have in Findhorn, based off the wind power that they have on site. And this is a very innovative infrastructure thing that they've included into the community. What can you do to encourage cultures of collaboration that work for everyone, rather than for individual benefit? Think in both terms of local and regional scales. So when we were in the UK at the climate conference, there was a lot of climate action going on, and later we went to London, and there was lots of protests going on, and we were involved in that. And we also went to Westminster, and we were talking with the ministers, and they were saying how important permaculture is for climate action. And this then inspired me to go create permayouth. So permayouth is our response to creating a safe climate for future generations and all life.
Now, the SDGs are not without critique. One of the key criticisms about them is that they're actually non-binding, meaning that even though 193 countries unanimously signed on to support the SDGs, there is nothing that says that they need to be delivered. So it's an agreement, but not a law. So that means that they can be diluted somewhat. However, they are there, and they're agreed upon so universally that I think that we have strength in the fact that they're there. Another criticism is that a lot of effort is being put into reporting about what the SDGs are and what they're doing, and such a smaller percentage is actually in the action. Now, this is actually where I think permaculture comes in, because it helps us to, it fits so beautifully. It actually gives us the opportunity to take these SDGs and to connect them with the permaculture action around the world and start to ripple that out, and also rise up the profile of permaculture, I believe, because if you have governments and international agencies, NGOs, universities, businesses all using this language, the language of the SDGs, and we can talk from a permaculture perspective, saying we're able to address these particular SDG goals through this project, we start to be able to meet that level of communication and enable permaculture to have a different voice and a different platform. And I was speaking recently to Rosemary Morrow, a permaculture elder, and we were discussing how permaculture can reach out even more than it has already This is a conversation that I recorded for a podcast, so I'll be putting this conversation out soon. But and one of her key responses, well, actually we need to align with the SDGs. And so I thought that was a really good, strong point from her, that in aligning ourselves with global goals, we give ourselves more strength from the permaculture movement. So I think we should really take a look at that. Another criticism is that the actions focused in poorer countries, because a lot of the SDGs, if you've seen, are around poverty and hunger and gender equity, and a lot of the action is focused in poorer countries. However, it needs to be global. It needs to be working at both ends. But in terms of that, Jason Hickel, a fantastic thinker from South Africa, has actually said that we possibly need to rethink some of these SDGs. And so I think it's an interesting comment that he made, that the first SDG says no poverty, but he said that there's actually no goal in here that says we should have no extreme affluence, which that simple shift in our thinking, once we start to look at it from this perspective, does make you bring into question some of the underlying assumptions in the SDGs. But I think we can layer these on too. We can add our understanding and our depth of analysis of these principles, but not throw them out. We can expand upon our understanding of how we apply them. So I think that's a really important one, that actually shifting from no poverty to actually eradicating extreme affluence is a really good step, considering that we know that the richest 1% own half the world's wealth. And that's actually one of the key problems in why there is poverty in the world. And we also know that growth doesn't actually provide a solution to poverty. Another criticism of the SDGs, and I'm just taking these two as an example, there's other criticisms for all of them, but let's just stay focused on a couple. For example, in the no poverty one too, there's criticism that the poverty line that's suggested is actually way too low. Within the explanation of SDG 1, no poverty, the poverty line is actually being set at $1.25. And so the criticism of this is that that's actually too low. The poverty line should be set much higher than that, at $5, and even that's incredibly low. So we need to look carefully within those different explanations too, to see that it's actually fitting with our permaculture ethics and our permaculture thinking. Now, the one that really stands out for me in particular, that just doesn't ring true, is SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth, because this concept of economic growth seems to be such a contradiction to creating a regenerative and sustainable culture. We need to abandon the GDP. This is what Jason Hickel's saying. And we need to also abandon the growth paradigm, the economic growth paradigm, and bring it into a sense of natural growth and circular systems, and think more along the lines of what Kate Raworth is talking about with the donut economics. And also thinking about maybe, redefining decent work, good work. What does that mean? So really looking at this SDG number 8 and definitely redefining what this means, because actually growth doesn't provide a solution to poverty. We know that the richest 1% own half the world's wealth. And in order to actually address poverty, we need to confront the inequality that exists here. And particularly with the economic growth paradigm, it's been shown that actually the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer, and economic growth is actually the opposite of actually trying to address no poverty. What it comes down to is that we need to focus on the systems, the root causes, and the connections between the challenges. And then also always focus from a multi-contextual way, that we put together multiple goals that we focus on. And also a really important thing is to localize the goals. How do we take these global goals that are quite generic and turn them into something that means something to us in our local community, in our local projects, in our local organisations. And also then redefine too how we can think about permaculture in these SDG concepts. So we can just simply, let's just have a look at these here. So SDG 2 is about zero hunger. Now permaculture is essentially about trying to bring about a level of food abundance through kitchen gardens and food forests and transforming landscapes to be edible landscapes all over our settlements, and transforming what our farms look like too, to be more regenerative and more sustainable, and thinking about food first, which then actually obviously weaves into good health and well-being when people have access to good food locally and have much cleaner water and cleaner air and less contamination from chemicals from an agriculture that's unsustainable. And a permaculture approach of people care really focuses on supporting gender equality, as much as it does too in supporting clean water and sanitation, focusing on, for example, here at Krista Waters in the eco-village, that there is no development that happens within 50 metres of the river and 20 metres of a waterway, and looking at natural toilet systems that mean that there is no pollution of the waterways through that. We're not flushing away human manure into fresh water. We're actually finding ways to deal with it within our own systems. So compost toilets, for example. Now, permaculture also has a lot of focus on creating local community energy systems, solar energy systems, actually reducing our consumption of energy, and also very much focusing on how we can create local sustainable communities, whether that be in rural communities or in urban communities. And one of the key principles of permaculture too is about waste equals food, which is really looking about how you can create that responsible consumption and production of resources in a way that is within the planetary boundaries. And of course, the whole approach of permaculture is essentially about creating a safe climate and diminishing our footprint. That means that we can rewild at least 50% of nature. So the goals of permaculture and the goals of SDGs are really closely aligned. So from the perspective of SDG 2, zero hunger, this is one that we need to address really urgently. The World Food Programme has said that 265 million people could be pushed to starvation by the end of 2020. We have a humanitarian crisis that's unfolding as we speak, and we're not particularly hearing about it. Already 130 million people are on the brink of starvation, and with COVID and the changes in the distribution of the food, another 130 people are expected to be added to this. And this is on top of the fact that already 820 odd million people go to bed hungry every night, and a huge proportion of that are children. So some of the things that we can do with this, well, focusing on how we can support young people to get into permaculture and communities all around the world to look at creating a food first situation. So this is part of the permayouth team from Rwanda refugee camp in Uganda. These young people are aged between 10 and 16 years old, and you can see the teacher there, Bemariki. Hello to you, Bemariki, if you are listening to this. And hopefully maybe some of you permayouth are watching this as well. So they've been working with Bemariki to learn permaculture through the Permaculture Educators program, through watching videos and meeting with the global permayouth once a week, and meeting too with me to do a Zoom chat with question and answer, and we send each other information. And so what's happening through this program is that they're working to address poverty through creating their own local food, to creating micro enterprises that can support them and their families through their gardening practices. They're addressing the problem of lack of access to food through this garden program. And of course, this is supporting their health and well-being, both physically and mentally, by having a very practical and meaningful project that they can be working on. And at the same time, it's also supporting their education. So this education that these young people are having, learning about permaculture, learning about ecological design principles, learning about restoring their land, learning about bringing the soil to life, learning about health and well-being, and all of the things that they're doing outside in their garden and through the design and planning and the innovative ideas that they're coming up with is a quality education that's going to serve them well. And it's not just about going out in the garden and digging. This is a very thoughtful and considered approach of looking into the science behind soil and the science behind the design systems that they're implementing, and then learning the practical application of this as well. So there is a lot that's going in, and of course the business education, communications. They're writing songs about it. They're doing plans, drawing plans. So the richness of the skills that they're learning, and also through it they're connecting globally with young people around the world and hooking up through pen pal programs. So they're learning other languages and sharing culture and ideas. So as you can see, by doing a permaculture project, you can actually start to address lots of different things. And of course, there would be many more of the SDGs that we can describe through this. So I think one of the things that we can start to see is that we can take any example of a permaculture project, and each one of these SDGs that we look at is like a lens. So we take a look at that particular project through that lens, and we can then see it from different angles. And we never want to see it just from one angle, because then it becomes one-dimensional. So we can look at this and go, okay, so if the SDG goal is no poverty, what are the ways that we can enhance this project to actually help to lift people out of poverty in this context? And when we look at it from the hunger SDG, we can look at how we can actually build in greater levels of abundance within the garden systems. What these young people want to do is, through their music and through their garden, is to ripple this out to support other young people in other parts of the village to take on the same thing. They have this goal already of spreading it out to 1,000 kids in the next year.
So this is a song that the Ramwanja Permayouth group have made, and it's called Cooperate Song, and it's giving thanks to all the help they've received lately from the Permayouth.
Kitchen gardening, I say, avoid this malnutrition. I say, let's go pirates, and let's go pirates. We gonna develop Asia. Let's go pirates. Let's go pirates. Let's go pirates. We gonna develop. Hey, let's go pirates. Oh, let's go pirates. Let's go pirates. We gonna develop our soul. Let's go pirates. Oh mama, let's go pirates. Hey, let's go pirates. We gonna develop. Hey, let's go pirates. Let's go pirates. Let's go pirates. America. We're gonna develop. Raya, let's go pirates. Hey, let's go pirates. Guy, let's go pirates. We're gonna develop. Yeah, this is a Romanda Permayouth. Let's cooperate. Thanks you to the supporter. We are thanking. Let's cooperate.
Now, another way we can be looking at these SDGs, let's have a look at this is Horshoy, which is an eco community in Denmark. Now, we can be looking at this from the perspective of affordable and clean energy. So as you can see, they have lots of solar panels on the top of their low-level housing there. They also have a range of different housing options, which means that these smaller homes up the top are actually housing commission type houses. So it's affordable housing with unit housing, and then there's also individual homes. This is a blend of different kinds of housing, all available together, so that this high quality of life is available to people from all different backgrounds. Now, another interesting innovation in terms of their infrastructure and also their energy is that they separate the toilet system. So they have a urine separator. So all the urine is collected from all the homes and directed down into this little woodlot you can see behind the bees. And so this grows really rapidly. It's a lined pit, so it's not contaminating any of the groundwater. But the trees grow really fast, and then they chop them back, they coppice them, and that's then sent into this highly efficient wood chip heater. And you can see some of the chimneys up above the roof there. And this is where they turn it into steam, and that creates heat which is sent around the entire village for central heating. Now they get so much energy from that, from the urine turning it into wood, which turns it into heat, that they're now added a Stirling engine into that too, which actually creates energy for the village. So by really thinking innovatively about their energy systems and how they're living together in sustainable communities, they're able to really think about reducing their consumption of fossil fuels, and also in an urban type of context, thinking about how they can become producers. So it's not just about cities sucking in resources and spewing out waste. It's actually thinking about how this plays. So this is a suburb. Essentially, it's just a different type of suburb where they've actually created a farm in the middle and pushed the houses to be more tightly compacted to enable space for these things to happen. So when we take the goals of sustainable development or regeneration as the core, how our cities and our suburbs and our towns and our habitats and all of those different things shifts, because we have a clear set of goals that are not about economic maximization or economic growth. They're actually about these core goals of living more sustainably. Permaculture and the SDGs provide a really good framework for supporting communities in places like Western Kenya, this example here, where every day just about I'm talking with Jane. She's the lady in the blue standing next to me. Now, for a couple of years I've been supporting Jane's work with the Women's Self-Help Group. Each of these members here are leaders in different villages, and so together they've been learning permaculture, and together they're setting up demonstration gardens in their own homes and communities, and also supporting each other to teach other people in their community, young people, farmers, and to reach out this way of creating resilient food gardens for themselves, which helps them to address health and well-being. It helps them to create a good livelihood from their land and actually rise up their economic situation. So while I talked earlier about this concept of economic growth from the corporate perspective of not actually being the thing which is supporting sustainability and regeneration, but in the context of supporting communities in places like Kambiri here, actually looking at how these women can raise up their standard of living and actually create a livelihood, a regenerative livelihood from their small parcels of land. So not just growing maize and getting a small amount of money when they send it off and getting a small amount of money and going out and buying poorer quality food. They're actually growing a diversity of products on their plots and able to feed themselves first and have a diversity of high quality crops that they can then sell. But it's also creating enough material that they can then be improving their soil over the years, not depleting it and not being dependent on chemicals for pesticides and also chemicals for fertilization, which means that also their health and well-being is better from that. Now, part of what we're trying to do with the Ethos Foundation is to redistribute wealth within the permaculture system, which is about this, reducing the inequalities. So finding a way to get resources that are collected through the permaculture network to be able to support communities like theirs. So each day I receive donations from people around the world who are offering support either for a woman to do a permaculture course or a young person to have access to a kit of permaculture gardening resources so they can go into their gardens in the refugee camp and start to do permaculture gardening. So these women in the Women's Help Group are often mothers and grandmothers, but they're also starting to work a lot with supporting the younger women as well, to not only access good quality education, but also to learn the skills and the techniques that permaculture bring to enable them to actually rise up. Another example of how the SDGs relate to permaculture is here. This is Krista Waters, where I live. And so very much part of what we're trying to do here at the eco-village is actually to restore diversity in the landscape. So over 50% of the eco-village has been set aside to help to restore the forests and to regenerate the land. So this is, and that's particularly on the upper slopes, and it's created a beautiful habitat zone. I recently had a chat to the local bird watcher, and he's said he's counted 190 species of birds within Krista Waters. We also daily see kangaroos and wallabies and echidnas throughout the landscape. And also in terms of life below the water, the way that these lakes have been designed, there's around 17 lakes throughout Krista Waters, and they've been designed with natural edges so that it actually supports a greater level of life in these water systems. So every day as I'm walking past these lakes, I'll see turtles and there'll be different sorts of fish. And in summertime, you can just hear them massive amounts of frogs coming to life in these places. So they're full of life, both in and around the edges, but also underneath as well. And so it's an important part too of creating a sustainable community. Now, this is a sustainable community in terms of an eco-village. Amongst all of these trees, it's a little bit hard to see because the trees are growing so much. There are 83 households and there's 250 people living within this eco-village. And the idea is that it's not separating out, farming over here and nature goes over there and then this is where humans are. This eco-village is really looking towards ways that we can integrate and bring together human life, natural ecological systems, and sustainable food systems in a way that our systems are supporting one another. So, for example, my house is just above this system here that you're looking at, and I need to make sure that any runoff that comes off out of my house or out of my toilet system is not going to end up contaminating this lake below me. Just as below this picture, there's the agricultural flats area. So we need also to be careful that anything that we do in that area is not going to cause runoff and contamination to the riparian zone, which is very high up in the Mary River catchment, meaning that it has high ecological values, and there are some endangered species in there, including the endangered Mary River cod and the very rare lungfish. So the way that we think about how we design our communities and our settlements can support a sustainable life on land and also really acknowledge the importance of what's going on underneath the soil and what's going on below water, and that all of this too is supporting a reduction of our emissions and a drawing down of carbon into the forest regeneration systems and into the regeneration of the soils. If we consider that in order to support the Australian way of life, for example, it would take 4 Earths to absorb our wastes and to meet our needs. And we only have one. So in order to live a one planet life, we need to significantly reduce our consumption of resources and our production of waste. So some of the key things that we can do about that is by really reducing our footprint, reducing our energy consumption, reducing the distance of transportation for our food, and looking at ways of relocalizing the way that we meet our needs. And ecovillages are fantastic ways of learning how to do that. And as are community gardens in the city. Now there's so many different ways, again, that you can start to look at a community garden through the lens of the SDGs. So they're helping us to think differently about how we live in the city. They're helping us to think differently about how we deal with our waste and how we consume. So here in the community garden, people are actually growing a significant amount of their food, or at least some of their food, and often bringing down food scraps to community composting systems. So it's shifting how things are produced and consumed, particularly in the food system. It's very much about climate action, about becoming more aware about what we need to be doing, learning the skills about how to live a more climate-safe way of life, and also taking action together, either planting trees or looking at how to restore the catchments, thinking about how to improve the soil to draw down carbon. And within these organisations, it helps us to look differently at how we organise ourselves and to create different types of structures that build community and build social justice and build a sense of peace and connectedness in our community. And community gardens are open and accessible places that enable people of all different backgrounds to be able to participate and benefit from the programs. And it's really helping us to reconnect with the land. And particularly this is important in the city when we're often feeling quite disconnected from what's happening around us. It helps to support the reduction of hunger in the city. We've noticed many times within the community gardens that people come in and they're harvesting food. And this is a really important part of a community garden, is that it's helping to address those basic and important needs of people who have nothing and who can really be benefited from these community commons of these food systems. The community gardens also help to think about different ways of cleaning water, so through the setting up of grey water systems, through looking at different sorts of compost toilet systems, of collecting rainwater. And it's very interesting to see how so many different practical examples can be set up in these sorts of places that then can be translated back into people's home gardens and also into other community gardens elsewhere. And of course, it's a fabulous place where people can come together and learn positive skills for good health and well-being. And this type of education, community-based education, where people are learning from one another, so this mutual learning about what it means to live a good life, a sustainable life, what it means to come together to restore your natural area. This is quality, ongoing, lifelong learning that is so important. So again, you could take each of the 17 different SDGs and explain what's going on in community gardens through that. I'm really proud of this young group of permayouth people. They've been getting together for many months now, meeting weekly, talking about permaculture, connecting each other up, inspiring each other with great ideas, and also connecting globally. So this group here is from Southeast Queensland, and sometimes they get together in camps like this, but mostly they they talk online, because they're talking with people from all different parts of the world, from Zanzibar, from Sweden, from the Philippines, Thailand, all around Australia and beyond. And also they're meeting with refugee kids. So this top group here is a group from the Kakuma refugee camp. And Sakina, who is the lady in the blue dress on the side with the headdress. Sakina is a woman who we supported to come and do a permaculture design course in Uganda. And my children actually came with me to do that course with Sakina. And since then, we've worked with her, and she's helped to create PermaKids programs in the refugee camp. And just now, she's also been inspired to start a permayouth club there. So she has 30 young people that she's starting this program with. She started last week, and I meet with her every Wednesday to talk about the things that she'd like to teach them, to make sure she has the resources she needs. And the permayouth is also raising money to support each of these children to have access to the tools, seeds and resources that they need. So what this is doing is creating partnerships across the planet to support young people everywhere to have the access to permaculture education, and to create and develop up these strong relationships that help to reduce inequalities and create really great permaculture education everywhere. Now, one of the things that too is really inspiring me about this is that there's lots of mentors that are starting to offer their support for this group. Just the other day, a few of us were online with Fritjof Capra, who is an eminent scientist and ecological thinker. And he was talking with the young people about ways in which we can be thinking in an ecological paradigm and understand the systems view of life. And so he's starting to talk with them about quantum physics and sustainability in a way that deepens their understanding so significantly. And there's a whole range of different people who've offered to speak with these young people and to inspire them. And so we'll be recording these conversations and sharing them out. So how will we be living in 2030? What is the agenda for 2030? And this is what the SDGs is really asking us to think carefully about how we will move forward to reverse climate change, to focus on regenerative agriculture, to create regenerative cities. So we're going to be needing to look at local food, strong communities, good work, earth repair, climate resilience. And this is what's been called the Decade of Action. So the UN is calling for us all, for governments of all different levels, for businesses, for community members, individuals, to really focus on how we can take the next 10 years to be the 10 years that we do decisive action to change the trajectory. And we need to mobilize everyone everywhere and demand urgent and far-reaching solutions. Now, you can find a lot of information on this UN website, the UN UNSDGadvocates.org. And there's also another site full of materials that you can use to share the SDGs with young people. And there's lesson plans, and there's cartoons, and there's really amazing young leaders like Malala who have films and things to share. So you can find all of those resources to support how you teach young people SDGs at this website. So that's worldslargestlesson.globalgoals.org. So what I'd like to do is to really encourage you to link your project, your permaculture project, however big or however small, to the global goals, to the global SDGs. And what this means is that through your permaculture project, you will then start to show what that Agenda 2030 looks like. What does a sustainable way of life look like? And you can start to offer up some clear pathways of how to implement the SDGs through what you're doing with permaculture, and also to be through your education programs. If you're a permaculture teacher, or if you're sharing permaculture through a community garden, or even with your friends, you can start to demonstrate and articulate what those global goals look like in reality. And I actually believe that if we start to tell these permaculture stories through the framework of the SDGs, we will start to see permaculture not just be seen as a small gardening technique, but actually a key strategy for addressing the key issues that we're faced in our time. And it gives us a platform to stand up and speak up, and actually to be heard, because after 40 years of practicing permaculture, we have some of the best examples of how to live regeneratively. And it's really time at this point in this decade of action that we really speak up and put them forward and collaborate with other people, collaborate across disciplines, to collaborate with people in different realms. So even if you may not have completely agreed with what the SDGs have looked like, there's maybe a couple in there, like the economic growth one, for example, that you disagree with. But overall, the idea is that this is a common language that people understand, from villages in Africa to the UN, to government leaders, to business leaders everywhere, that this is a universal language. And so I think it's essential that we begin to put permaculture into this universal language as well. And it means that we can actually begin to address these systemic issues with a holistic approach. And we need to stand up and call for more political will. Like Fritjof Capra said, we need the political will and the commitment to these sustainable development goals, because we know what we need to do. We have the tools, we have the knowledge. What's really lacking is the political will, and perhaps the vision of understanding what it does look like, which is why I think it's really important that, as I said before, that we start to demonstrate and tell the story of permaculture through this framework, to be able to help catalyze more action and to make more connections between these different threads of knowledge, between these different worlds almost. So let's action the goals, these global goals, with permaculture. I would love for you to take some time to really think about how you could address each of these 17 sustainable development goals through the project that you do. So you could take one of these graphics, and on the internet you can find any number of these SDG goals that you can download, and you can start to map out what it might look like. So just imagine you took this and started to mind map off each one of these different goals, how you could use this goal to explain your project, or how you could actually address this goal through your project, or improve your project to actually be meeting more of these goals. It would be really wonderful to actually see how that looks. Send them through to me if you like. I would love to see them. And also particularly those of you who are doing the Permaculture Educators program, I think this is a really important thing for you to be focusing on, and I would love to see you start to post these in our Facebook group as well. So just to touch base on a few of the things that I've mentioned throughout, the Ethos Foundation, which I run, is a permaculture charity, and our current focus is on really supporting each of the women's self-help groups and the refugee youth groups to access the kitchen garden kits. So this is, we don't send equipment, we send money for people to buy them there, because it's actually it's too hard to actually send equipment, too expensive to send it over. So we send money directly to some of the key leaders, and they buy local tools and local seeds and local resources that they need, which also then helps to support local tool makers and local seed saving groups. And so it's actually much better from an economic perspective for them to be purchasing everything locally rather than getting materials shipped across from somewhere else. So these kitchen garden kits are really about helping to address what I mentioned right at the very start around the issue that's being faced by humanity at the moment, that we have 265 million people who will be on the brink of starvation by the end of this year. That's 1 in 30 people in the world. One of the best things that we can be doing at this time is focusing on helping people to create kitchen gardens so that they have resilient food gardens in and around their homes and communities. If you are able to donate to help a young person to get their own kitchen garden kit, that would be so fantastic. So we're asking for $30 per child. So if you're able to either support one child or maybe a number of children or even part of a kit, that's fantastic. And the donation portal is through ethosfoundation.org.au. And I need to let you know too that I gather that funds and I send them directly to trusted people in the community. I don't take out any money for processing that. The only bit that comes out is the bank transfer fee. So I cover all of the administration costs and all of that. So every cent goes directly to the projects. Now with the women too, I'm also supporting them to create demonstration gardens and to offer free permaculture education throughout their community. So we're actually in the process of trying to set up a number of different permaculture education centres and permaculture education programs. Typically it's around about $150 per person to access a permaculture design course. So rather than asking people to pay for the course, they'll pay a little bit so that there's a commitment to it. But in order to provide, the food and the accommodation and to actually pay the teachers who are running this, it is about $150. And the teachers with that, they're all local teachers. If you want to find out more about the permayouth, we have an introductory website that's available. So the young people are still working on that, but you can find out some information already at permayouth.org. And if you'd like to have more information, please feel free to email me about this. If you have any young people who are between the ages of 11 and 16 who'd like to join the weekly permayouth meetings, please also get in touch. There's a weekly newsletter that goes out with information, and then they explore, everything from the principles, the ethics. They're also starting to do presentations to each other. So, for example, this week we had a presentation from one of the participants about waste and how you can use waste to build things and decorate things, and how you can actually consciously reduce your waste in your system. And it was a brilliant presentation. Next week there will be one of the participants' mothers doing a session around wild harvesting. So each week there's something really fascinating going on, and it really is particularly a youth space, and we're quite strict about that to try and keep it as a safe space for the young people. So it's only really the young people, and every now and then one of their mums or dads that kind of join in, but it's run by the young people and it's for the young people. And they also have direct links every week with the refugee camp in Uganda, which is absolutely fantastic too.
I really welcome you to come along to the permayouth meetings, because we talk about a very large range of subjects. We've gone through the principles, and also we talk about systems thinking, and also the Earth Charter and permaculture relating to the SDGs.
If you'd like to find out more about permaculture, if you're just new to permaculture, I have a 4-part permaculture series that you can access. So it's a series of 4 videos that I just talk about what is permaculture and how you can weave it both into your life but also your livelihood too. And I talk about what the Permaculture Educators program is and help to unpack that and answer many of the questions that I get about that. So you can access that. This has got a little shortened website here. So that's www.bit.ly/OPL 4-part series. And so also you can find out more directly about the Permaculture Educators program by going to the Permaculture Education Institute.org website. Now, the Permaculture Educators program is a dual certificate program. It weaves together a permaculture design certificate with the permaculture teacher certificate, and also has bonus modules about how to set up and create your sustainable, ethical permaculture enterprise. So this really is about trying to help you create a livelihood from permaculture, so that it's something that you can really focus all of your attention on and really make a significant contribution to this decade of action. You can start anytime. It's a flexible program. There is no expiry date, and whenever you send in the assessments is the right time to send them in. So I'm trying to take as much stress out of it, but also providing the flexibility to enable you to weave it in and around your life. And things happen too, so sometimes you need to put it aside and you can come back to it. But if you do want to just race right through it too, you can do it as fast as you want. So that's the Permaculture Educators program. This is Silky, one of the recent graduates from the program, who's been doing brilliant work in Kenya, working with orphanages, and is about to head back to Germany to start running her programs there. I also have an online permaculture gardening course, so more of an introduction to permaculture course, and you can see the sign here, done by the wonderful Natasha, a friend of mine who lives here at Krista Waters, what all the different modules are. So there's 9 modules in the course, from creating superb soils, how to set up and make your garden, and growing abundant food, thinking about how to set up a food forest, and embedding in lots of different nutrient-rich superfoods into your garden, how you can think about setting up a medicinal garden, what are the kinds of things that you can grow to in your garden that you can use to make natural beauty products, or how do you fill your garden with things that you can have as your local natural teas, and how do you cook up some of the more interesting things that you'll find in a permaculture garden. So this is called The Incredible Edible Garden, and you can find information about that at ourpermaculturelife.com, The Incredible Edible Garden. You can see the link down there below. And again, that's a self-paced course, and you can once you have access to that, you have access forever into that. I also want to let you know too about my YouTube channel. So you'll be able to find well over 150 films here of all different sorts, from tours to gardens to practical ones like this one, how to make a no-dig garden, to the video interviews that I'm now putting up onto a new podcast, so you can actually watch the interviews on the YouTube channel. So there's lots of different things that are up there and available to you to help you to find out really practical ways to get your permaculture garden started, and also to listen to some experts such as Charles Dowding from England, or Stephen Harding about Gaia theory, or Fritjof Capra soon talking about the systems view of life. So all of these different perspectives on permaculture. So this is my blog, and I load up the different films onto this, as well as the podcast, but also a whole series of articles and practical information. So there's well over 400 articles on Our Permaculture Life, and I encourage you to subscribe to the newsletter, and that way you'll get regular updates of any new film materials, events, all available through the blog. So thank you so much for coming along to this session today. I really hope that it has been helpful for you to see how you can start to apply the SDGs to your permaculture work, and to think about the ways of connecting and making relationships in order to bring strength to permaculture, but also to help the SDGs find a way to really become so much more practical. Like I said right at the start, Mae East, one of the authors of the SDGs, told me that the SDGs provide this broad, universal framework for creating sustainable living. But it's permaculture which seems to be the thing that she's seen in most parts of the world, which is actually helping us to make it real. So stick around now, and you can, if you're here live, stick around now and you can continue to ask more questions or engage in discussion in the chat.
So thanks so much for joining us. For our common future, let's step up and aim for a regenerative culture and a one planet life. Please come and join us in the Permayouth. If you know someone that's 11 to 16 or you are 11 to 16, please either subscribe to our newsletter, our weekly newsletter, or look up our website, which is permayouth.org. And we've also got weekly meetings on Sundays.
So it's been a great pleasure to have your company for this session. If you'd like more information about the Permaculture Education Institute, our Permaculture Life, Ethos Foundation or Permayouth, please get in touch. My email is the one with the reminder for this masterclass was sent out to, or you're also welcome to put in comments below if you're watching this later on, and we'll dive in there too and have a conversation with you there. Okay, take care. I'll see you on July 27th for the next masterclass.